Pine Ridge is a small town with a population of just over 8,000, tucked away in the hills of Pennsylvania. It's a place where everyone knows each other by name, where news travels faster than the weekly newspaper, and where family reputation is valued more than a bank account. In small towns, secrets are kept in plain sight, says Sheriff David Gardner, who has been head of the local police for 15 years. What happened to the Clark family shook Pine Ridge to its core. No one could have imagined that behind the doors of their neat house on Maple Street there was so much pain and betrayal. The Clark family was the embodiment of the middle-class American dream. Robert, the manager of the only large supermarket in town, provided a steady income. Alice taught literature at Pine Ridge High School, where she herself had once been a student. Their daughter Megan graduated from the local community college and worked as an administrator at Dr. Wilson's clinic. In a town where many young people left in search of a better life, Megan stayed. She loved Pine Ridge and couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Megan was always such a sunny girl, recalls Nancy Wilkins, the Clarks' neighbor. She grew up right before my eyes. I remember her selling lemonade in the summer and using the money to buy food for stray cats. No one deserved happiness more than she did. Happiness seemed to knock on the door 3 years ago when Jason Foster arrived in Pine Ridge. The attractive 30-year-old entrepreneur returned to his hometown after 10 years away to start a construction company. Jason's younger sister, Diana, had never left Pine Ridge and worked as an accountant for the city government. Jason arrived with big plans, Diana Foster said in her first interview after the tragedy. He had experience working for large construction firms in Philadelphia. He said Pine Ridge needed to be revitalized with a modern approach to construction. Jason was always ambitious. Local resident Pam Rodriguez recalls Megan and Jason's first meeting. It was at the annual town festival. Megan was helping organize a charity raffle, and Jason had just started his business and was sponsoring the event. They looked at each other as if no one else existed. The romance developed quickly. 6 months after they met, Jason proposed to Megan at Marco's, the only place in Pine Ridge that served non-American cuisine. Alice was thrilled about the engagement, says Alice's friend Carol Simmons. She couldn't stop talking about what a wonderful son-in-law Jason would be. Robert seemed less enthusiastic, but we all chalked it up to normal fatherly apprehension. Men always have a hard time letting their daughters go. Robert Clark did express some doubts about his future son-in-law. In a rare comment for the documentary, he admits, "There was something about Jason that seemed insincere to me. I couldn't put my finger on it. He said all the right things, made all the right gestures, but there was something calculating in his eyes. I tried to hint at this to Megan, but she was too in love to listen. The wedding preparations took almost a year. Megan wanted everything to be perfect, from the venue, the Thompsons' restored barn on the outskirts of town, to the menu, a combination of traditional dishes and vegetarian options for the bride's friends. I had never seen Megan so happy and so stressed at the same time," recalls Lisa Parker, Megan's best friend and maid of honor. She wanted this day to be the perfect start to her new life with Jason. And you know what was strange? Alice seemed even more obsessed with the wedding details than Megan herself. 2 months before the wedding, Alice began spending an unusual amount of time with Jason. She explained that she wanted to get to know her future brother-in-law better and help with the planning. "I noticed how often Alice was calling," Robert says. "Jason this, Jason that. At the time I thought it was just enthusiasm. Megan was our only child, and Alice always wanted the best for her. I decided she was just trying to make sure Jason was good enough for our daughter." A month before the wedding, the first disturbing incident occurred. Diana Foster walked into her brother's office unannounced and found him in a tense conversation with Alice. They were standing too close to each other, Diana recalls. "When I walked in, they jumped apart." Alice looked embarrassed and quickly said something about discussing a surprise for Megan with Jason, but the atmosphere was strange. Diana shared her observations with Jason's father, William Foster, but he dismissed his daughter's suspicions. "My father adored Jason," Diana says. "He always said my brother would go far. When I told him what I saw, Dad called me paranoid and told me not to make up problems out of thin air." 2 weeks before the wedding, Robert Clark began to notice changes in his wife's behavior. Alice became distracted, frequently checked her phone, and made up excuses to leave the house. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. and saw that Alice wasn't in bed, Robert says. I found her in the backyard. She was talking on the phone in a whisper and crying. When I asked her what was wrong, she said it was because of unexpected problems at work. I pretended to believe her. A week before the wedding, tensions in the Clark family reached a peak. Megan noticed her mother's strange behavior but attributed it to pre-wedding stress. Megan came to me in tears, recalls Lisa Parker. She said she felt like her perfect wedding was turning into a nightmare. Alice was constantly changing her mind and arguing with Megan over trivial things. Jason suddenly became distant and talked about his doubts. On the evening before the wedding, the Clark family and close friends gathered at Marco's restaurant for a rehearsal dinner. Witnesses described the atmosphere as electric. Alice looked sick, recalls waitress Ashley Moore. Pale with red eyes, she barely touched her food. Jason sat across from her and avoided looking at her. Megan seemed to be the only one genuinely trying to keep the mood festive. After dinner, Robert tried to talk to his wife, but Alice refused to discuss her condition, citing a migraine. I felt like something terrible was coming, Robert admits, but I couldn't imagine the scale of the disaster that would unfold the next day. The wedding day, June 15th, 2024, began with bright sunshine and a cloudless sky. No one present suspected that this day would forever change the history of Pine Ridge and shatter the illusion of the perfect Clark family. I knew Alice Clark from college. We weren't just colleagues, we were close friends, says Margaret Wheeler, a history teacher at Pine Ridge High School. When she started to change, I noticed it right away. It didn't happen a month before the wedding, as many people think. It started much earlier. According to Margaret, the first changes in Alice's behavior appeared about 6 months after Megan and Jason's engagement. Alice, who had always been punctual and organized, began canceling their traditional coffee dates, skipping faculty meetings, and appearing distracted in class. One day I asked her straight out if everything was okay, Margaret continues. She said she was just worried about Megan's wedding, but there was something else in her eyes, excitement that had nothing to do with maternal concern. Tim Donovan, owner of Pine Ridge's only coffee shop, Morning Sip, recalls how Alice and Jason began appearing together long before the dramatic events at the wedding. But they came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always around 4 o'clock. They sat in the far corner, leaning toward each other across the table. I figured they were discussing wedding plans, but there was something about the way they fell silent when I approached their table. In a small town, you learn to read between the lines. According to the school schedule, Alice's classes ended at 3:30 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Jason's construction company office was only a 10-minute walk from the coffee shop. He could easily leave under the pretext of meeting with clients. Diana Foster, analyzing her brother's behavior during that period in detail, notes an important detail. Jason was always obsessed with his phone. After I caught him with Alice in the office, I noticed that he started carrying his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. He would put it face down and change the lock screen password every few days. Once I joked about it, asking if he was spying on me. Jason snapped at me so angrily that I never brought it up again. The exact moment when the friendship between Alice and Jason turned romantic remains unclear. However, the key moment may have been a trip to Philadelphia 7 months before the wedding. Megan said that her mother and Jason went to choose a special wine for the wedding from a supplier who only worked with wholesale customers, says Lisa Parker. They left early in the morning and came back late at night. Megan was so touched that Jason was taking the time to do something like that. She was crazy busy at the clinic at the time. It was flu season, and she would come home exhausted. Alice explained the trip as a desire to meet Jason's parents, who had moved to the suburbs of Philadelphia after he returned to Pine Ridge. A family dinner was supposed to be part of the day. However, William Foster, Jason's father, later denied this information. There was no dinner. Jason called and said he was coming with his future mother-in-law, but canceled at the last minute, citing traffic on the highway and lack of time. CCTV footage from the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia, obtained during the subsequent investigation, shows that Alice and Jason checked in at 11:30 a.m., and left the hotel at 7:45 p.m. They were listed in the guest book as Mr. and Mrs. Foster. When I found out about this, I literally felt physically sick, Robert Clark admits. For 18 years, Alice and I taught Megan the values of honesty and loyalty, and all that time she was living a double life. However, Alice's close friends point out that her relationship with Robert had long since ceased to be ideal. Carol Simmons, Alice's friend since high school, reluctantly shares her observations. Alice and Robert had been living as neighbors for the last few years. They rarely spoke, and even more rarely laughed together. Alice once let slip that they had been sleeping in separate rooms for several years. I'm not making excuses for her. What she did was unforgivable. But she was a lonely woman in a loveless marriage. Psychologist Dr. Rachel Goldman, who is not connected to those involved, comments on similar situations. Romances with children's partners are more common than many people think. Often it's not so much about physical attraction as it is about a desire to recapture lost youth, to feel desired and significant. The forbidden nature of such relationships adds a thrill that may be lacking in a long marriage. As the wedding date approached, the relationship between Alice and Jason became increasingly tense. Cameras at the supermarket where Robert worked captured an emotional conversation between them 3 weeks before the ceremony. They didn't know there was a camera in that corner of the parking lot, Robert says. I watched the footage after everything happened. There was no sound, but their body language spoke volumes. Alice was crying, Jason was grabbing her hands. Then she pushed him away and walked to her car. He caught up with her, said something, and she hit him in the face. Sarah Mason, the wedding coordinator hired by the Clark family, recalls a strange conversation with Jason 2 weeks before the ceremony. He came to my office alone, even though all the meetings had been with Megan. He looked exhausted, with red eyes. He asked if the wedding could be canceled and what the financial losses would be. I explained that most of the deposits were non-refundable, especially so close to the date. He sat there silently for a long time, then said, "It'll still be cheaper than the price we'll have to pay later." The next day, he called and apologized, explaining that it was all due to pre-wedding jitters. He asked me to forget about our conversation. Megan, immersed in her work and final wedding preparations, seemed oblivious to the mounting tension. Her immediate supervisor at the clinic, Dr. Wilson, notes, "Megan is a person of remarkable determination. When she focuses on a task, everything else fades into the background." In the weeks leading up to the wedding, she was working flat out, plus coordinating the final details of the ceremony. If there were any signs, she may simply not have noticed them. However, some hints did reach the bride. Tony Savino, a bartender at Marco's, recalls the evening 10 days before the wedding. Megan came with her friends for a bachelorette party. Towards the end of the evening, she went to the bar to order another drink and saw a photo on my phone, a selfie of Jason and a middle-aged woman in our restaurant. I didn't know who the woman was. I just posted photos of our guests on the restaurant's Instagram. Megan asked when they had come. I checked the date. It was Tuesday, the day the restaurant is usually closed. But my cousin, the owner, sometimes opens for special customers. Megan looked at the photo strangely and said, "That's my mom." She immediately called Jason and went outside. When she came back, she was calm and said they were discussing a surprise for the wedding. 3 days before the wedding, an incident occurred that could have changed the course of events. Carol Simmons discovered a series of messages from Jason on Alice's phone, which she had borrowed to make a call. "I didn't mean to spy. Alice gave me her phone to call my husband when mine died. A message came in, and I glanced at it without thinking. It said, 'I can't do this anymore. I have to tell M everything.' And then, 'You said you'd leave R after the wedding. The time has come.' I was in shock and didn't know what to do. When I gave her back the phone, I just asked if everything was okay. Alice took the phone, glanced at the screen, and turned pale. She said it was work correspondence about a problem student with the initials MR. I pretended to believe her. God, how I regret not intervening then. The night before the wedding, after a tense rehearsal dinner, Jason didn't spend time with his friends at his bachelor party as planned, but alone in a motel bar on the outskirts of Pine Ridge. He drank almost a bottle of whiskey, says bartender Ray Peterson. He wasn't rowdy, just sat there staring at one spot. Around midnight, he started talking to himself. I heard phrases like, "She deserves the truth," and "How could I have screwed up so badly?" When I offered to call him a taxi, he looked at me with such empty eyes that it made me uncomfortable. He said, "It's too late for the right decisions." I decided it was just the usual pre-wedding jitters. That same night, Alice wrote a letter that was later found by investigators. Addressed to Megan, it began, "By the time you read this, I will have done the most selfish thing in my life." The letter was left unfinished. The morning of June 15th was clear and windless. There was no indication that this day would go down in Pine Ridge history as the day when perfect facades collapsed, exposing the dark secrets of a small town. June 15th, 2024, the morning of the wedding day. The Thompson family cottage, located next to the barn where the ceremony was to take place, had been rented for the bride and her bridesmaids to get ready. At 7:30 a.m., Megan and her 4 friends were already there. A makeup artist and hairdresser, specially invited from Pittsburgh, were busy creating the wedding looks. Megan was the epitome of calm, recalls makeup artist Alicia Ramirez. Some brides are nervous, moody, but she was smiling and joking. She said she had been waiting for this day her whole life. Alice was supposed to join them at 8 a.m., but she was half an hour late. According to bridesmaid Emily Chang, when she finally arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept all night. Her eyes were red, her hands were shaking. Megan asked if everything was okay, and Alice said she was just nervous. She brought a bottle of champagne and insisted that everyone drink to Megan's happiness, even though it was only 9 in the morning. At the same time, Jason and his groomsmen were getting ready at the Foster's house. The videographer hired to film the wedding captured the tense atmosphere. Usually at times like this, there's a lot of joking and encouragement, said cameraman Kevin Walsh. But Jason's room was deathly quiet. His friends tried to lighten the mood, but he barely reacted. At one point, he asked everyone to leave so he could collect his thoughts. When I returned 15 minutes later, he was sitting with his phone in his hands, crying. At 10:45, Jason sent a message that would later become an important piece of evidence. Addressed to Alice, it read, "I can't do this. Meet me in the barn storage room at 11:30. Last conversation before I become Mr. M." Alice read the message in front of her daughter and turned visibly pale. Citing the need to check the flower arrangements, she left the cottage at 11:20. Megan, left with her friends, unexpectedly received a message from Sarah Jenkins, a guest who had arrived at the barn early. "Just saw your mom rushing to the barn. Is everything okay? The ceremony is at 2, right?" Something clicked in Megan's head, recalls Lisa Parker. She frowned and said, "Mom's been acting strange all day. I'm going to check what's going on." We offered to go with her, but she refused. She said she'd be back in 5 minutes. If we had known what was going to happen, we would never have let her go alone. Megan, still in her bathrobe with her hair half done, headed for the barn, located 300 meters from the cottage. The main entrance was closed. A team of decorators was working on the finishing touches. Remembering the side door leading to the utility rooms, Megan headed there. What happened next is known from the words of Megan herself, who gave a statement to the police a few hours later, and Tom Anderson, a technical service employee who happened to be near the storage room. "I heard women's voices," Tom recounts. "At first they were muffled, then louder and louder. I thought it was one of the staff arguing and wanted to leave, but then there was such a scream that it sent shivers down my spine." Opening the door to the storage room, Megan found her mother and Jason. According to her, Alice was pressing her back against the wall. Jason was standing close to her. They did not notice Megan's arrival. "I've made up my mind," Jason said. "We'll have the ceremony, and in a month I'll file for divorce. I'll say we're incompatible. No one will suspect a thing." "Are you out of your mind?" Alice replied. "This will destroy her. I can't do this to my own daughter." "But you could sleep with her fiancé?" Megan exclaimed, causing them to turn around. Witnesses described what followed as a scene from a nightmare. Megan lunged at Jason with her fists, while Alice tried to pull them apart. The noise attracted the workers and several early guests. "Megan was screaming so loud you could probably hear her in the next county," recalls Sarah Jenkins. "She called them animals, traitors. She asked how long this had been going on and if the whole town knew what they were like. Jason stood with his head down, and Alice tried to explain, but Megan wouldn't listen. A few minutes later, Robert Clark arrived, called by one of the guests. "I've never seen Robert like that," says Reverend James Wilcox, who was supposed to perform the ceremony. He's usually a calm, level-headed man, but when he realized what was happening, there was something terrifying in his eyes. He grabbed Jason by the collar and pinned him against the wall. It took 3 men to pull him away. Megan ran out of the barn, sobbing. Alice tried to follow her, but Lisa Parker, who had come running at the noise, blocked her way. I said, "You've done enough," Lisa recalls. Alice looked devastated, but at that moment I didn't feel sorry for her. I went after Megan. Robert, coming to his senses, addressed the assembled guests and workers. "There will be no wedding. I apologize for the inconvenience." Then he turned to his wife and uttered the phrase that many would remember, "You're not coming home, ever." Jason, taking advantage of the moment, tried to slip away unnoticed, but was stopped by his sister Diana. "You're sick," she said loudly enough for everyone around to hear. "Our family will never recover from this disgrace." By noon, news of the scandal had spread throughout Pine Ridge. Guests arriving for the ceremony were met with awkward explanations and requests to go home. Megan, accompanied by Lisa and 2 other friends, left for an unknown destination. It later emerged that they had gone to a mountain cottage belonging to Lisa's family. Robert Clark returned home alone. According to neighbors, he methodically gathered Alice's belongings, carried them out onto the lawn in front of the house, and doused them with gasoline. He stood and watched her clothes, photographs, and books burn, recalled neighbor George Peterson. When the fire department arrived, he didn't resist, but he didn't help put out the fire either. He just stood there with a blank expression on his face. Unable to return home, Alice checked into the Pine Grove Motel on the outskirts of town. The staff recalls that she checked in around 3 p.m., looking like a ghost and asking not to be disturbed under any circumstances. Jason returned to his father's house. According to Diana, he locked himself in his old room and refused to come out. His father tried to talk to him, but Jason wouldn't open the door. We could hear him breaking things inside. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Pine Grove Motel. Surveillance cameras recorded Robert Clark entering the building at 7:42 p.m. Footage from a camera in the hallway shows him knocking on Alice's door. She opens it, looking frightened, then steps back, letting her husband inside. The door closes. "About an hour later, I heard loud voices coming from their room," said Doris Fleming, a guest in the room next door. "The man was shouting something like 18 years down the drain, and how could you look her in the eyes?" The woman was shouting too, but I couldn't make out the words. Then something heavy fell, and everything went quiet. I thought about calling reception, but decided not to get involved in a family quarrel. At 9:15 p.m., cameras recorded Robert leaving the motel. The footage shows him wiping his hands with napkins and throwing them into a trash can in front of the entrance. He sat in his car for a long time without starting the engine, then drove off abruptly. At 9:45 p.m., Alice called 911. Operator Michelle Dawson recalls the call. The woman was speaking with difficulty, gasping for breath. She said she needed medical assistance, but not the police. When I asked what had happened, she replied, "I deserve this," and hung up. Emergency services arrived at the motel at 10:03 p.m. Paramedics found Alice unconscious on the floor of the room with multiple bruises and a head injury. She was taken to a local hospital, where doctors diagnosed her with a concussion, 2 broken ribs, and multiple hematomas. She refused to file a report against her husband, said Officer Teresa Gomez, who arrived at the hospital to interview the victim. She said she fell in the bathroom. When I pointed out that her injuries didn't match a fall, she cried and asked to be left alone. That same night, around 11:30 p.m., Megan arrived at the Foster's house. According to Diana, she was in a trance, pale, with empty eyes. She asked where Jason was. I didn't want to let her in, but she insisted. She said she needed to talk to him alone. Diana accompanied Megan to her brother's room and left, deciding that they needed to clear the air. 15 minutes later, she heard a scream and rushed upstairs. Megan ran out of Jason's room with a look of horror on her face. "Call an ambulance!" she screamed. "Hurry!" When Diana entered her brother's room, she saw a terrible sight. Jason was lying on the bed, an empty bottle of sleeping pills, and a note lying next to him. "I'm sorry. I let everyone down. Megan deserved better." The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. Paramedics began resuscitation and took Jason to the same hospital where Alice was being treated. Doctors fought for his life throughout the night, but at 4:12 a.m. on June 16th, he was pronounced dead from a combination of sleeping pills and alcohol. The worst part, says Nurse Ashley Grant, who was on duty that night, is that he and Alice were in neighboring rooms. When he was brought in, she somehow recognized him and tried to get out of bed to see him. They had to hold her back. The news of Jason's suicide shook Pine Ridge. Many residents expressed their condolences to the Foster family, while others condemned Jason for his cowardice. But no one could have imagined that the real tragedy was yet to come. The morning of June 16th, 2024, found Pine Ridge in a state of collective shock. "It was like an earthquake for our town," said Pine Ridge Mayor Frank Warren. "Everyone knew the Clark family, many frequented Jason's business. A tragedy of this magnitude. We haven't seen anything like this in decades." At 9 a.m., Sheriff David Gardner called an emergency press conference where he confirmed the death of Jason Foster and announced the start of an investigation into what happened at the Pine Grove Motel. Although the sheriff did not name names, by that time the whole town knew that he was referring to Alice and Robert Clark. "We ask that you respect the privacy of the families during this difficult time," the sheriff said. "Any speculation or spreading of rumors could hinder the investigation." Despite the sheriff's appeal, social media and local chat rooms were flooded with discussions about what had happened. Residents were divided between those who condemned Alice and Jason and those who thought Robert's reaction was excessive. At noon that day, Alice Clark was released from the hospital on a recognizance bond. Unable to return home, she accepted Carol Simmons's offer to stay with her. "She was devastated," Carol recalls. "Her physical injuries seemed insignificant compared to her emotional state. When she found out about Jason's death, she couldn't stop crying. She kept saying that she should have died, that she had ruined the lives of everyone she loved." On the same day, William Foster published a statement in the local newspaper asking for respect for the family's grief and refraining from condemning his late son. "Jason made a mistake, but he paid the ultimate price," William wrote. "Let those who have never made a mistake cast the first stone." Megan Clark remained in the mountain cabin with her friends, refusing contact with the press and most of her acquaintances. Lisa Parker, the only person communicating with the outside world on her behalf, said that Megan asked that her right to privacy be respected. Robert Clark admitted during questioning at the police station that he had visited the motel, but categorically denied physically assaulting his wife. "I came to talk," his words are quoted in the police report. "Yes, I was angry and raised my voice, but I did not raise my hand against her. When I left, she was unharmed. If she says otherwise, I demand a confrontation." An examination of the napkins Robert threw away at the motel found no blood, only traces of alcohol. Without a statement from Alice, and in the absence of direct evidence, the police could not charge Robert with assault. Jason Foster's funeral took place on June 18th. The ceremony was private, attended only by family members and close friends. Neither Megan nor Clarky showed up. "Diana cried all day," says Martha King, the Foster's cousin. "She blamed herself. She said that if she had intervened earlier when she noticed something strange, all this could have been avoided." During the investigation, the police gained access to Jason's phone. Correspondence between him and Alice, which lasted more than 8 months, confirmed the seriousness of their relationship. "This wasn't just a fling," comments Detective Alex Morgan. "Judging by the messages, they were making plans for a future together." Jason repeatedly asked Alice to leave her husband, but she hesitated, worried about her daughter's reaction. Investigators were particularly struck by a message sent by Alice 2 days before the wedding. "I can't do this to Megan. Let's meet at 8 p.m. at the lake. We need to end this." Jason replied, "Don't make any rash decisions. I'll find a way to make sure no one gets hurt." On June 20th, Megan Clark returned to Pine Ridge and gave a statement to the police. She confirmed that she had found Jason with an empty bottle of sleeping pills, but refused to reveal the content of their last conversation. "That will remain between him and me," she is quoted as saying in the police report. "He has already paid the ultimate price. Let him rest in peace." On the same day, Megan visited Carol's house, where Alice was staying. Neighbors watched as mother and daughter talked for hours in the backyard. "They weren't shouting or crying," said Carol's neighbor, Peter Grant. "It looked like a very intense but restrained conversation. At one point, they hugged and stood there for a long time." That evening, Megan came to her father's house. Robert, who had not left the house since the tragedy, let someone in for the first time. "They talked all night," said Nancy Wilkins, a neighbor of the Clarks. "The living room light was on until dawn. In the morning, I saw Robert walking his daughter to her car. They looked exhausted but calm." On June 22nd, an event occurred that changed the course of the investigation. Alice Clark came to the police station with a lawyer and gave a new statement. She claimed that she had inflicted the injuries at the motel herself, hitting herself on the furniture in a state of extreme emotional distress after her husband left. Mrs. Clark confirmed that there was a verbal altercation between her and Mr. Clark, but she categorically denies any form of physical violence on his part, the sheriff said at a briefing. Given the new testimony and the lack of evidence to the contrary, the case of the alleged assault is closed. Opinions in Pine Ridge were divided. Some believed that Alice was protecting her husband out of fear or guilt, while others believed her new version of events. On June 24th, Pine Ridge School Principal Thomas Baker announced that Alice Clark had submitted her resignation. On the same day, it became known that she had put her share of the house on Maple Street up for sale. "She couldn't stay in Pine Ridge," explains Carol Simmons. "Wherever she went, people pointed fingers and whispered behind her back. It was a small town with a long memory." On June 25th, Megan posted a single statement on social media. "I ask that you respect my family's privacy during this difficult time. The flood of rumors and speculation only adds to the pain. My mom, dad, and I are trying to find a path to healing. Please give us that chance." By the end of June, life in Pine Ridge was beginning to return to normal, although the incident left a deep mark on the town's collective memory. On July 1st, Megan Clark resigned from Dr. Wilson's clinic and left Pine Ridge without telling even her close friends about her plans. On July 4th, Independence Day, when most residents gathered in the central square for the traditional celebration, Robert Clark made a decision at his home on Maple Street that shocked Pine Ridge more than any previous event. That same evening, Alice Clark, who was preparing to leave town, received a strange envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a key and a short note. On the morning of July 5th, neighbor Nancy Wilkins, concerned that Robert was not answering his phone, looked through the window and saw a scene that prompted her to call the police immediately. "I can't describe it," Nancy says in a trembling voice in an interview for a documentary film. "Some things are better left unseen." Police officers who responded to the call found Robert Clark dead in the living room. According to the medical examiner's report, death was caused by multiple stab wounds. Judging by the nature of the injuries, the blows were inflicted with extreme force. Head of the investigative department, Michael Diaz, announced the start of a murder investigation. The main theory was revenge by one of Jason Foster's relatives or friends. Everything changed when the police received a call from Alice Clark's lawyer. She was at his office and asked to meet with the detectives. Alice Clark was arrested that same day. During her first interrogation, she uttered a phrase that shocked even the most seasoned police officers. "I freed us all." Alice Clark's trial began on October 15th, 2024, exactly 4 months after the tragic day of the failed wedding. The trial attracted the attention not only of Pine Ridge residents, but also of the national media, which saw all the elements of a sensational story: a love triangle, betrayal, revenge, and murder. A provincial tragedy became a mirror in which American society saw its dark side, writes journalist Christopher Young in an article for the Boston Globe. The story of the Clark family shows how deadly passions can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Jennifer Morgan, presented the following version of events. Alice Clark, overcome with guilt after her lover's suicide and rejected by her daughter, decided to take revenge on her husband, whom she believed was responsible for destroying her life. This is a classic case of premeditated murder, Morgan said in her opening statement. The defendant carefully planned the crime, choosing a moment when the entire city was busy celebrating, securing an alibi, and preparing the murder weapon. The key pieces of evidence were a kitchen knife with traces of Robert's blood and Alice's fingerprints, found in a trash can 2 blocks from the Clarks' home. Surveillance camera footage showing Alice wearing a hoodie and dark glasses heading toward the house on Maple Street at around 8 p.m. on July 4th. Traces of blood on clothing found in Carol Simmons' house where Alice was staying. Alice was represented by renowned criminal defense attorney Marcus Jenkins, who from the outset chose an unexpected strategy. His client did not deny the fact of the murder but insisted on self-defense. Mrs. Clark acted in self-defense, Jenkins said. The events leading up to the tragedy, and especially the incident at the Pine Forest Motel, created a reasonable fear for her safety. On the 3rd day of the trial, the court heard testimony from Alice Clark herself. Pale and emaciated, she publicly recounted her version of the events of the past few months for the first time. Her romance with Jason began by chance during one of the wedding preparations. We both felt lonely, Alice testified. I was in a marriage that had long since become a formality, and he was in a relationship that he had entered into too hastily. We didn't plan to fall in love. It just happened. According to Alice, a month before the wedding, she decided to end the relationship, realizing how much pain it could cause Megan, but Jason insisted on continuing the relationship. He said he loved me, not Megan, that he was only marrying her out of fear of public condemnation and would find a way to be with me. I should have been stronger and stopped him, stopped us both. The most shocking part of Alice's story was what happened at the Pine Forest Motel after the wedding scandal. Robert was furious, like I'd never seen him before. He called me a whore and said I'd disgraced him in front of the whole town, in front of his daughter. When I tried to explain, he hit me. Again and again. I lost consciousness. According to Alice's testimony when she came to, she did not go to the police because she believed she deserved to be punished. I really caused him terrible pain. Part of me felt relief from the physical pain, as if it could atone for my guilt. After Jason's suicide, the situation worsened. Alice began receiving anonymous, threatening messages. One of them read, "You should have died instead of him." I didn't know who they were from, someone in Jason's family or Robert. I was scared and shared my fears with my lawyer. The climax came on July 4th. Alice received an envelope with the key to the house on Maple Street and a note. "Come over tonight. Let's talk like adults. R." I didn't want to go, Alice continued, but Megan was out of town and I felt like I should at least try to make peace with Robert before I left. I hoped that time had dulled his anger a little. According to Alice, when she arrived, Robert was drunk. At first, the conversation went well, and he even offered her a drink. Then he started asking about Jason, about our relationship. He asked very intimate questions. I refused to answer, and he became enraged again. He said that I had ruined Megan's life and that she would never be able to trust men again, that I had ruined his reputation in town. According to Alice's testimony, Robert grabbed a kitchen knife and began threatening her. He said, "No one will miss you. Even Megan will be better off without a constant reminder of your betrayal." I tried to calm him down, but he started waving the knife around. At some point I grabbed his arm, we struggled, and the knife ended up in my hands. I don't remember how it happened. All I remember is his eyes full of hatred and my fear. Alice's testimony provoked mixed reactions in the courtroom. The prosecutor pointed out inconsistencies in her story, emphasizing that 17 stab wounds were difficult to explain as self-defense. On the 6th day of the trial, the court heard testimony that changed the course of the case. Contrary to expectations, Megan Clark took the stand to defend her mother. "For a long time, I couldn't forgive my mom for what she did," Megan said in a trembling voice. "But in the last few weeks before he died, my father changed. He became obsessed with revenge. In our last conversation, he said that my mother would pay for everything. I didn't think much of it. I thought they were just words. Now I regret not taking the threat seriously." Megan also confirmed that Robert had a history of angry outbursts, although he had never been physically violent before. Once, when I was 15, he smashed all the plates in the house because my mother was late coming home from a school meeting. He was always very possessive. The turning point in the trial came when the defense presented Robert's diary, which Megan found after his death. Entries from the last few weeks contained frightening lines. She thinks she can just walk away and start a new life? After everything she's done? Not on my terms. And later, the plan is ready. July 4th, when the whole damn town is watching fireworks. A poetic ending. Cross-examination of Alice also revealed new details about her relationship with Jason. In particular, she claimed that in their last conversation before the wedding, she tried to persuade him to call off the ceremony. I said we should confess everything to Megan, that the deception would only make the pain worse. He agreed but wanted to postpone the conversation until after the weekend. If I had insisted then, maybe things would have turned out differently. The court's attention was drawn to the full version of Jason's suicide note, which had not previously been published in its entirety. I'm sorry. I let everyone down. Megan deserved better. Alice, you were right. We should have ended things long ago. Don't blame yourself. I drove myself into a corner from which I see no way out. I hope that someday Megan will be able to forgive and forget. Mom, Dad, Diana, I love you. An expert examination confirmed the authenticity of the note and found no signs of coercion in its writing. On October 25th, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Alice Clark was found guilty of manslaughter in the heat of passion. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years. It was a fair decision, commented lawyer Daniel Hoffman, who observed the trial. The court took into account the victim-blaming Alice was subjected to after the scandal, her psychological state after the loss of her lover, and Robert's previous violence. 6 months after the verdict, journalist Michael Bennett was granted permission to interview Alice at the County Women's Correctional Facility. I'm not trying to justify myself, Alice said. I made terrible mistakes that led to the deaths of 2 men and caused my daughter unbearable pain. If I could go back, I would have found the courage to tell Robert about my marital problems long before Jason came into the picture. When asked if she is in contact with her daughter, Alice replied, Megan writes to me every week. She moved to Oregon and started a new life. She works with traumatized children. She says it helps her heal herself. We both understand that our relationship will never be the same, but we are trying to build something new on the ruins. Diana Foster also left Pine Ridge after the tragedy. According to mutual acquaintances, she volunteers for an organization that helps victims of domestic violence. Stories like the one in Pine Ridge happen more often than we think, says psychologist Dr. Rachel Goldman. They don't usually end so dramatically, but the roots are always the same. An inability to talk openly about problems, fear of judgment, a preference for saving face over honestly acknowledging one's feelings. In Pine Ridge, according to Sheriff Gardner, life has gradually returned to normal. The house on Maple Street was sold to a family from Pittsburgh. Jason's construction company office is now occupied by an insurance agent. People haven't forgotten, but they've learned to move on, says the sheriff. Events like this make you wonder how well you really know even the people closest to you. Former student Amanda Ross visits her former teacher in prison every week. Mrs. Clark taught me to love literature and understand human nature through books, Amanda says. Now she runs a book club for inmates. She says that stories help people make sense of their lives and find a way out of even the darkest situations. On the last day of filming, the documentary crew received an unexpected letter from Megan Clark. I've thought a lot about what happened in our family. I often ask myself if I could have seen the signs of trouble earlier. Now I realize that we were all too busy maintaining the appearance of happiness to see the real problems. I don't excuse my parents or Jason's actions, but I refuse to see them as only villains or victims. They were complex people, entangled in a web of their own desires, fears, and social expectations. My story is a warning. Look beyond appearances. Speak up about what troubles you before silence becomes a destructive force. Love openly, but not blindly. I survived this tragedy and found the strength to move forward. I hope others can learn from our story, so that their own paths do not lead to such dark endings. A documentary film about the events in Pine Ridge was released on the anniversary of the tragic wedding. It sparked a national discussion about hidden violence, the value of honesty in relationships, and the fine line between justice and revenge. The Clark family's story has come to an end, but the echoes of what happened continue to resonate in the hearts of those who witnessed it. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.